eno ye Extreme Media UJ. Subscribe for all updates.
Where leaders like Dr. Kiza Besigye, Honorable Muhammad Mwanga Chivumbi, Alex Waiswa Mufumbiro don't have to spend time in jail simply because of their desire for a better country. When people like Eddie Mutwe, Olivia Lutaya, Doreen Kaija, Achideo Chivumbi, Yasin Sechitoleko Machete, Kalanzi Sharif, Sam Mugumya, and several others are locked up and separated from their families for donkey's years just because they agitate for better governance, then everyone should be concerned because there are no survivors in a sinking boat. So we continue to implore all right-thinking Ugandans, including our colleagues in the NRM, who are bothered by the wrongs going on in our country, to join efforts in the quest for a Uganda that works for all Ugandans. Suppliers and contractors who delivered goods and services to government are now facing bankruptcy. Jobs are being lost. Businesses are collapsing. When government fails to honor its obligations, it weakens the entire economy. That's the reality that we are living today. It's flummoxing how government is able to freely give out taxpayer money to private companies, but it cannot pay its citizens who it owes money. That should bother everybody. Government has so far spent 180 billion shillings on Inspire Africa Coffee Factory in Ntungamo, a private company whose benefits the citizens don't see at all. But of course, the business owner keeps laughing all the way to the bank on taxpayer money. Day Biopharma, that's another private company, which promised the country the COVID vaccine. And that vaccine never came, as we all saw. And then later, promised government that it would begin to manufacture medicine for the country. 724 billion shillings was given to this businessman, the proprietor of Day Biopharma. But there's no medicine coming out of that country, of that factory, to date. Atiak Sugar Factory has so far consumed 668 billion shillings of taxpayer money. But you guessed right. There's no sugar coming out of that factory, even when taxpayer money was heavily injected. Rocco Construction Company also got free money for no work done. 263 billion shillings was selectively given to them. Unlike the others, the excuse was that this was a bailout to the struggling company, as if other businesses are not struggling. We have time and again asked government to come up with a modus operandi for bailouts, because bailouts are understandable even globally. But when you selectively handpick a few connected people who have friends, relatives, in-laws, and outlaws in government, and you give them free taxpayer money, and no one is held accountable for this, it is wrong. Government said it was buying stake in these companies, but no valuation was done, no agreements were ever signed, and it's business as usual. So as these and other private companies get taxpayer money free of charge, government heavily taxes other companies, and as you have noticed, there's a raft of new taxes that the citizenry has got to contend with. Is this the future that was secured for the people of Uganda? Let me talk about our alternative approach. As the opposition, we propose a different path, one guided in fiscal discipline, in realism, and prioritization. We propose a more realistic resource envelope of approximately 71.4 trillion shillings. Aligned with actual economic performance, we call for reducing domestic borrowing, prioritizing arrears clearance, and ensuring that public spending reflects national priorities. Some might wonder why we are proposing 71.4 trillion, and yet government is proposing 84 trillion. So somebody might say, but opposition, why are you promising less? you should be happy that government is talking about a bigger figure of 84 trillion shillings. The reality is that this 71.4 trillion shillings is what we can marshal as resources for the fiscal year. That's the reality. Government tends to bloat the budget figure, as it has done this time round as well. But every financial year, we always have less resources than the bloated figures, which are intended to create an impression that our economy is big, and yet not. Government bloats up these figures because the Public Finance Management Act allows for a 3% usage where they don't have to get clearance from Parliament. They can eventually come and inform Parliament later. Now, 3% of 70 trillion is not the same as 3% of 84 trillion. That's partly why they bloat up this figure, so that that 3% window is larger. But the reality is, all these past financial years, the bloated figure they project is never attainable because that money in reality is not there. An expanding and unpredictable resource envelope creates room for expenditure that escapes adequate scrutiny, particularly under classified allocations whose proportional limits are tied to the overall size of the budget. In effect, the larger the envelope, the greater the scope for opaque spending, often justified under national security, but subjected to limited oversight. It is precisely these weaknesses in fiscal credibility and discipline that necessitate a renewed focus on what truly matters: safeguarding lives, securing livelihoods, and strengthening institutions. We must move away from reckless expansion and towards strategic recovery. To safeguard lives is to invest meaningfully in healthcare and education. Our healthcare remains critically underfunded, receiving only about 6% of the national budget, far below the Abuja target of 15%. The consequences are clear, ladies and gentlemen. Understaffed hospitals, frequent drug stockouts, and high maternal mortality. We must prioritize primary healthcare, recruit and retain health workers, and ensure consistent availability of essential medicines. And we do have that money. Ladies and gentlemen, each of us is getting a copy of the alternative budget priorities that we have broken down with the figures. I'd like to implore us to find time in the coming days and read it, because we break down where the money is. Some people say, you want us to do all these different things. Where is the money? The money is actually available. On an annual basis, we lose over 10 trillion shillings to corruption. That's according to the Inspectorate of Government. That's a government figure. And when you get a figure from government, it is obvious they have tried to panel beat it a bit so that it doesn't look as grotesque as it really is. There's a lot of wasteful expenditure in this our country. So we do have money. So as I do share this is pretty much a summary, but I'd like to encourage us, please find time and read. Many times people say, but where are the alternatives? Are you people just criticizing? No. It's important that we point the country in the right direction, that we show people where we ought to be moving. Government must account for false promises like the Lubowa Specialized Hospital. Over 700 billion shillings has so far been spent on this botched project. But there is no hospital. When we began to make a lot of noise about this Lubowa hospital, we tried to access it, we were denied access. The Minister of Health was at one time denied access to that facility, and yet the Ministry of Health is supposed to supervise it. As we kept up the pressure, they began to put up a structure. There's a shell of a structure. When you go past that road, you see a shell. But that's not the hospital that was promised. That shell does not account for the nearly 1 trillion shillings that has so far been spent on that hospital. So there's got to be accountability. This project here was presented as a remedy to the complicated medical procedures which require Ugandans to travel outside of the country at exorbitant costs. But like many other projects in this our country, It's a complete failure. The money being spent on such white elephants should instead be injected into existing health facilities across the country, which are struggling with poor infrastructure, drug stockouts, lack of equipment, and facilitating medical personnel to do their work, including medical interns whose services continue to be taken for granted by this government. You have heard them say, you students. These medical interns, they carry the bulk of the work that is done in these government health facilities. Some of them work for 48 hours non-stop as doctors. We have got to not take them for granted. In education, increased enrollment has not been matched with quality. We have quality education as opposed to quantity education. We have got quantity education as opposed to quality education. Overcrowded classrooms, poorly paid teachers, and inadequate infrastructure, all of which continue to undermine learning outcomes. We must not invest in just access, but in quality, ensuring that education equips our young people with real skills for the future. Safeguarding livelihoods, that's the other element in our theme, means putting the economy at the service of the people, because it has always got to be about the people. Agriculture, which employs the majority of Ugandans, continues to be underfunded. Farmers lack access to irrigation, credit, extension services, and reliable markets. As a result of this, productivity remains low and incomes unstable. We must increase investment in agriculture. We must support value addition and strengthen rural infrastructure. In transport, the challenge is not just expansion, but maintenance. Roads deteriorate faster than they are repaired, increasing costs for businesses and limiting access to markets. We must prioritize maintenance, improve contract management, and invest in alternative transport systems such as rail and water. Where is the money? It is available, and we have broken down all of that. The other element of our theme is safeguarding institutions. No country, none whatsoever, can progress without strong institutions. Today we see growing concerns around accountability, transparency, and governance. Public funds are not always used efficiently. Oversight is weakened. Corruption continues to erode public trust. We must strengthen institutions such as the Auditor General, the Inspectorate of Government, and Parliament's oversight committees. Public resources must be managed transparently, and those who misuse them must be held accountable. Let me talk about another elephant in the room: the impending sovereignty bill. Honorable colleagues and distinguished guests, as we reflect on the direction of our country, we must also turn our attention to the impending sovereignty bill, which has got far-reaching implications for governance, rights, and Uganda's place in the global community. At face value, the idea of sovereignty is appealing. Every nation has got the right to protect its independence and determine its own path. However, we must ask ourselves a fundamental question: whose sovereignty are we safeguarding? Is it the sovereignty of the Ugandan people or the unchecked power of the state? There is growing concern that this proposed legislation may be used not as a shield to protect national interests, but as a tool to insulate government actions from scrutiny, both domestically and internationally. If framed properly, such a law risks weakening constitutional safeguards, limiting civic space, and undermining the very institutions we seek to strengthen. Honorable members and our guests this morning, Uganda's sovereignty is already anchored in our country's constitution, the grand norm. resides in the people, and it ought to be exercised through democratic institutions that are accountable, transparent, and bound by the rule of law. Any attempt to expand this concept must therefore be approached with caution and with full regard to constitutional principles. We must also recognize that Uganda does not exist in isolation. Our economy, our security, and our development are deeply connected to regional and global systems. International partnerships, trade agreements, and development cooperation have played a critical role in supporting our growth. A law that appears to withdraw Uganda from these frameworks or to disregard international obligations risks isolating the country, discouraging investment, and undermining economic stability, now that we're talking about the budget. Furthermore, we must consider the potential implications for human rights and governance. If the sovereignty bill is used to justify restrictions on accountability, media freedom, or civil society engagement, then it ceases to be a tool of protection and becomes an instrument of control. This would not only weaken our institutions, but also erode public trust in government. As the opposition, we are not against the protection of Uganda's sovereignty. On the contrary, we believe that the true sovereignty is strengthened where citizens are empowered, when institutions are independent, and when government is accountable to the people. Sovereignty should not be used to shield inefficiency or suppress dissent or avoid scrutiny. It should be a foundation for responsible governance and inclusive development. We therefore call upon Parliament and the country at large to subject this bill to thorough scrutiny. Laws that are not consistent with the Constitution should never see the light of day. We must protect the people and not undermine them. We must strengthen institutions and not weaken them. And we must position Uganda as a confident, cooperative, and respected member of the international community. I'm glad that this morning we are joined by some honorable members who belong to the NRM. I've seen some of them in our midst, and I'm glad they are here. Because this country belongs to all of us. And all of us must strive to better Uganda. It's important, regardless where you belong. Sometimes we have a lot of friction amongst ourselves politically, and there can be a place for that. We saw the boisterous election. But we've got to have a meeting of minds to say, how do we better this country? Because the places which we all represent, including the colleagues from the NRM who are here, when their voters go to hospitals, they also want to find medicine there. They want good roads. They want better education for their people. They want jobs for their youth who are bothering them in those constituencies. So, while we are calling this the Opposition Alternative Budget Priorities Day, really we are saying, can we focus on the country? And so once again, I want to salute the colleagues from the NRM who have joined us. Thank you for coming, because we've got to build this country together for posterity. Fellow Ugandans, the choices we make today will define the future of our country. We cannot continue on the path of rising debt, weak accountability, and misplaced priorities. We must choose discipline over excess, transparency over opacity, and long-term national interest over short-term political convenience. Our alternative budget is not just a critique. It is a proposal for a better way forward, a way that puts the people first, a way that restores confidence in leadership, a way that ensures that the public resources truly serve the public good. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, safeguarding lives, livelihoods, and institutions is not just a theme. It's a responsibility. It is our responsibility to ensure that every Ugandan has access to healthcare, education, and economic opportunity. It is our responsibility to ensure that businesses thrive, that workers are protected, and that the economy works for all. And it is our responsibility to build institutions that are strong and accountable. As the opposition, We remain committed to holding government accountable and offering practical alternatives that reflect the needs and aspirations of our people. Because we must. So I would like to appreciate colleagues with whom we have been burning the midnight oil to put together this work. Members of the Shadow Cabinet. Let me request colleagues, members of the Shadow Cabinet who are here to kindly stand. Thank you. Thank you, colleagues. That's part of the team. Please take your seats, honorable colleagues. Together with our technical persons, let me request our technical people to stand as well. These ones normally want to be behind the cameras, but for today, Kambala Vise. These are some of the technical persons, please sit, that we do work with. Others have not stood and I have noticed. Those who haven't stood, but it's okay. They're normally camera shy. But we normally take off time, the Shadow Cabinet and our technical persons, to craft an agenda for this country, so that we are able to paint a picture of what ought to be. Because it's important for us to do that. And like I'm saying, ours is not just to criticize. Yes, we get to criticize, but after we have criticized and said this policy is wrong, we offer an alternative and say, in as far as we are concerned, this is the best policy that we ought to implement. And it's good for the country too. I know that whenever we present these, and even on the floor of Parliament, many times they are disregarded. That's okay. Initially, I used to get demoralized and say, but we put in a lot of work. And then our colleagues from the NRM side, even when quietly they tell us, hey, but these views, these policies are good, but at Shankwanzi we have been told to support a different matter. So they tell us. On our end, we are happy that at least we are giving direction to the country. And that's why I would like to encourage us, please read this work. I know it's a bulky document, 350 pages. Please find time and read and critique it as well, because it's important that we also get feedback for the work that we are doing, and that we see how we build this country together. I'd like to thank you again for coming. I've seen some representatives from civil society. I've seen some representatives from embassies here in Uganda, and all of us. Thank you for coming, for God and my country.
Abalungi abatuuliriza era abatulaba olunaku olwaleero tuchaddeko ewa Sheikh Asiraf Dembe.
Sebo nsanyuse okubalaba. Amannya agange Seeka Asiraf Dembe akola ku bizibu by'enjawulo. Omuntu singa aba alina ebirwadde tumusomereddwa, tumuwa amazzi ga lukuya nga bw'obadde ogalaba, tugenda abantu ku kyoto ne twokya emizimu emibi egibabaamu n'okulomba edduwa. Abantu singa abeera ng'ali wano atuuse sobola okumulombera edduwa, ne waba atatuuse nga mpadde amannya ge naye ng'ali wala. Neetaase enamba yange yeno eri 0707363711. Namwe bannyinaffe abali ebweru oyagala okuba nti oyagala okulombera ku dduwa ng'olina ebizibu, viza zibuze, amaka gakolongotana, sente zikola zimpita mu ngalo, ojja kumpeereza ekifaananyi kyo n'amannya go, ebyo byokka bijja kummala, nja kukulombera edduwa, ojja kutereera. Olunaku olusembayo mu mwezi mba n'edduwa eyawamu ffenna n'abalwadde bange abakadde n'abapya. Salaamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.